Courage speaks. Courage speaks. Courage speaks.
Welcome to episode 10 of Courage Speaks. I'm your host, Sam Sherman. Courage Speaks is brought to you by Courage to Connect, an outpatient mental health center for therapy, psychological testing, and psychiatry for all ages located in Chicago's North Shore. Since 2014, Mayor Hillary Schieve has been the mayor of Reno, Nevada, and currently serves as the president of the United States Conference of Mayors. Named one of USA Today's Women of the Year, Mayor Schieve found herself steering her community through uncertainty while battling her own internal challenges. Reflecting on her journey, Mayor Schieve unveils the isolation she experienced while also balancing strength and advocacy for others in her community and beyond. Amidst her own mental health journey, Mayor Schieve discovered a profound realization: the barriers to mental health care, even for those in positions of power. Her journey took a transformative turn as she confronted the stark realities of mental health accessibility, leading her to become a champion of advocacy. From navigating personal connections to mental health crises during the pandemic to pioneering solutions like providing Talkspace memberships for her community, Mayor Schieve exemplifies resilience and innovation in adversity. But Mayor Schieve's story goes beyond personal anecdotes. Her dedication extends to policy and action, advocating for initiatives like 24/7 mental health urgent care centers and a community-based approach to mental wellness. Join us as we delve into Mayor Schieve's journey, a narrative of strength, vulnerability, and unwavering commitment to transforming the landscape of mental health care one community at a time. Stay tuned as we uncover the extraordinary story of Mayor Hillary Schieve, coming up next on Courage Speaks. Mayor Hillary Schieve, thank you so much for joining Courage Speaks. As we were just talking right before the official introduction here, I've been really excited to get the opportunity and really the privilege to speak with you for this conversation and talk about some of the work that you've done, some of the work that you look to do, and just kind of all the things that you've been involved with. So before you were named one of USA Today's Women of the Year, I'm curious if you can kind of share with the listeners a little bit with like what your story was, your journey to ultimately getting elected to mayor in 2014 in Reno, if that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. I really never saw myself in politics. So it's really kind of crazy that I am the mayor. I've always been kind of an activist anyway, so probably a little bit more natural, but sort of how I became mayor is I'm a small business owner. I own a couple of businesses, and I was expanding my business, and I needed to move my sign 2 feet. And the city wanted to charge me about $5,000 to do it. And I was like, this is insane. And so you start to hear all these stories about government bureaucracy. And yes, it's very much well and alive. And so that night I was at a small business group and just talking to, some local business owners, and they were very frustrated at the city level. And not only that, at the time, there were about 4 of us that were starting this district where my business was. And so they had signed me up to go speak at city council, to go fight for sidewalks and lighting and those kinds of things. So anyway, a lot of people were just complaining about doing business in the city of Reno. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to run for office and change it. And that's just sort of my personality anyway. I'm much more of like, let's just get it done instead of complaining about it, because it's so easy to do that, right? So long story short, I ran for city council. I was the council member at large, which I loved because that is the position where you would represent the whole entire city. And so crazy enough, I ran against 21 people and I won. But I also have a very competitive background. I was an amateur figure skater and then turned professional figure skater. So I think part of my background in sports really helped. And I, we'll get into more of my story as we speak, but, my whole life growing up, I watched my brother and my sister struggle with mental health issues and addiction issues. And it's something that, I suppressed for so long because I thought that my family was the only dysfunctional family in the world. I think we all kind of do that. But
Mm.
long story short, whenever I got elected, so I kind of had this vision in my mind of all the things that I could, you know, change whenever I got to City Hall if I were to get elected. And one of them deep down in my heart, and I never spoke about it publicly, but was mental health and addiction. And this is how naive I was, Sam. I'll never forget the first day that I got elected. I went down to community development, and a lot of people don't understand the structure of government. I certainly didn't understand it, what the different levels are and what the different roles each jurisdiction plays, whether it's, state government, county government, local government that I'm in, obviously city government, and then federal government, right? So there's all these different layers. And most people don't understand what their role is. So I did not understand really probably the full capacity of the role at the city level. So I went into community development and I said, okay, what are the programs that we have for mental health and addiction? And they looked at me and they said, oh, honey, you ran for the wrong office.
Oh.
We only do sewers and streets here. And I'm like, what do you mean? I just spent a year running,
Right.
like nobody's business, to be in this role. But what I realized at that moment, I thought to myself, that's how disconnected we really are, in the sense that I think it's the number one crisis in our country. I think it has been for a long time. A lot of people, keep talking about, yes, and the pandemic, but it was way before that.
Right.
It was for that. And so, yes, I think the pandemic obviously had a massive, massive impact. I also think the pandemic brought a whole new level of people talking about it as well, which is a good thing. And obviously a bad thing is too. But I also realized that this problem is so massive that we can't work in silos, that the city does and should play a role. And I think mayors today, now more than ever, realize the capacity of doing that. And, I think because, we have a large county here, we work amongst our counties, but most of the structure is health and human services are funded on the county side. Cities don't receive, unless you're a different structure, county, city government, which is rare. So most cities are very separate. So that is one of the big initiatives, is that, because I'm the president of the United States Conference of Mayors right now, and I'm sort of the voice of all mayors throughout the country this year. And so that is something that mayors, we've been, on the Hill lobbying lawmakers to look at comprehensive legislation to change how that funding is. Because if you think about it, cities really are at ground zero of this crisis, because where do they take people in crisis? They take them to, we use our jails as mental health hospitals. They'll take you to an ER where they are totally not equipped to handle mental health challenges. Typically we see, patient dumping, unfortunately, when someone comes in with a mental health crisis. So really, and think about that, our police officers are really the ones that people interact with. And I always say, because I think this is just so crazy, Sam, is that, think about it. It's the only health care issue that we send police officers to, instead of clinicians, psychiatrists, doctors, people that really be handling this, right?
Right.
So think about that. So cities really are very critical and need to play a big role. And so that's what we've kind of been fighting for. Now, listen, if you work with your counties, and I've got a great relationship with my county, but, politicians come and go, and you get new leadership and they have different visions. I mean, right now I have a very good county partnership, so I can work with them, but most cities don't. So what happens is the funding for mental health is incredibly fragmented when it comes to getting it into cities, and there just is not a budget to do that in any capacity. So mayors have been on the Hill quite a lot, and we've been really doing everything we possibly can to look at comprehensive legislation to get those resources into our cities.
So if I'm understanding correctly, just with the funding, because it's again, I'm learning a lot just right in the first few minutes of this conversation. But as far as the funding, if I'm understanding correctly, the generally speaking, counties are going to be getting or distributing the funding or receiving the funding for like human services, like mental
Yeah,
health programs, for example. Specific cities don't have like budgets for those. That all comes from the county.
exactly. So
Okay.
the model really is it goes to, so when the federal government has funds, it goes to the state and then
Hmm.
it goes to the counties. And that's where health and human services sits. And
Hmm.
so none of that money ever goes to cities.
Yeah.
So that's why we're trying to change the dynamic of how that's distributed, because like I said, cities play a huge role. And look at the resources that, sort of come into play. Like I said, if we have the resources, it would be great. I wouldn't send a police officer to a mental health crisis,
Hmm.
right? And that's what you're seeing. So, but we're changing a lot where I live because of the relationships that I have with my county partners. But we're finding, and you even saw it during like COVID, where you saw mayors fighting with their governors, or,
Right.
they're just on totally, or just say maybe your county doesn't have the vision to invest in mental health and they're investing it in other places, right? So then again, here you are as a city saying, there's not much we can do because that funding doesn't come to us.
Yeah. This could be a whole nother conversation, but it's making me think just about for the listeners and even for myself, vote in local elections and I mean vote, period. But
And
the
you
important what one of these things I'm really hearing,
said, yes.
yeah,
Uh,
because like
yeah.
you said, it's like, people, if vote in general, but it's like if people are just voting at the highest levels of government, that's really not addressing local issues. And quite frankly, even if you're just voting, for like you should be voting in all of these elections and doing the research because that's how we're going to be seeing that change. You know more than anybody that
Yes,
change really doesn't happen at the highest levels. It's especially in communities, right? Um,
absolutely. You're
yeah.
exactly right. It's interesting how in this country we focus so much on national politics, but we had POTUS here this morning, and he was funny because he served on the county commission, I believe, and he said it was the hardest job he ever had because you're so
Mhm.
close to people, right? And he said it was the greatest job he ever had too. But I think to your point, it's really, really critical. And I laugh, and I shouldn't laugh about this, but think about it. Your local politicians can probably make your life a lot more miserable and your
That's
commute. Let's just
right.
say they, install a traffic light, or 10 of them. And all of a sudden now you're 20 minutes late to work, right? Like,
Yeah.
really does matter on the local level. And I know, people are, like I said, are always following national politics. And of course that matters too. But the biggest impact is right at your local level. So
Mhm.
whatever you do, especially if you're passionate about mental health, find out, what local leaders in your community are doing and if they're addressing it. And that's one thing I just, it's nice actually. You're starting to hear it more and more, from electeds, but it was very, very rare. Matter of fact, the last presidential election, I kept saying, no one's talking about mental health. No one's talking about mental.
Right.
Where are the people that are not seeing like what's happening on a day-to-day basis? Just walk
Mhm.
down any street in any city, and you will probably see something that needs to be addressed. And it's really tragic.
So I want to touch upon the United States Conference of Mayors, which was something that I actually just learned about when I was researching you. You're now the president, right? I think you were formerly the vice president and now the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Can you talk a little bit about what is the U.S. Conference of Mayors and how you got involved with it?
Yeah, let's see. I became involved about 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And it's just, it's an association of mayors. We're a very, very tight knit group, even though there's a lot of us throughout the country. Majority of mayors do belong to the United States Conference of Mayors. It's an organization where, we get together, we learn about what everyone else is doing in their cities, what's working, what isn't working. And mayors are, I'm a nonpartisan, but for the most part, mayors are really nonpartisan. I mean, we always say there's no Democrat or Republican way to fill a pothole, right?
Hmm.
We are very, very bipartisan. That's one great thing about mayors. And again, because we are so close to our communities. Like, I go to the grocery store and I'll know two or three people in my grocery store, or we see people at the Little League fields, or, we live in our communities, right? We also want a better community. So mayors have a very different perspective on politics, unless you're a mayor that obviously is like wants to go into, higher office or those kinds of things, that could play a whole other role. But for the most part, mayors live in their communities. They want their communities better. So we do a lot of networking with each other. It's really great to also have that kind of support because, when you're the mayor, sometimes you can really feel out like you're on an island, especially if something tragic happens in your city. And other mayors are there to support you because 9 times out of 10, they've probably been there, whether unfortunately it's a mass shooting or, something incredibly tragic. So we're very close, but we also do a lot of lobbying our federal delegations. We do a lot of that. And not to mention, mayors have pretty good relationships with, their delegations. And so if, I mean, for instance, I'm not from California, I'm from Nevada, but McCarthy at one time was sitting in a position where, I needed to get in front of him. And I just called one of my favorite mayors and said, do you know him? And he's from California. And he said, yes, I know him really well. Let me call him, let me get you a meeting. And so that's really helpful so that we have a presence nationally on the Hill. And so basically for the year, you pick, what your platform's going to be. Obviously, it's takes a long time actually to become the president because you have to sit and serve on so many boards and then you have to get elected by your peers. So it can kind of take a long time, but it's also, it's an honor to have the support of my colleagues. And it's even a bigger honor to have the support of them saying, yes, let's go with mental health,
Yeah.
because something I've been so passionate about. And I just didn't feel like it was getting the attention that it really needs to have. And it was interesting. There were just a lot of mayors that didn't even know how to approach the subject. And then what we started to find out is that other mayors were saying, there were times when I struggled with my mental health or, especially like for me going through the pandemic. And then, I lost my sister to cancer. And then a few weeks later, I lost my brother to addiction. And then 2 months later, I lost my brother-in-law who was engaged to my sister that died of cancer.
Mm.
So I just had a lot of loss in my life and I was so depressed and I felt very isolated because when you're the mayor, you have to show that you're strong and that you have tremendous strength because you have to be there for your community. And I had a lot of guilt about that because I felt like inside I was falling apart from all this grief that was happening across our country. And then obviously in my personal life. And so that's when I kind of learned a little bit more about the struggles to access for most people because I started getting on the phone and saying, hey, and of course I didn't use my name because I didn't want anyone to know. Here's the mayor.
Yeah.
I want them to say, yes, come in tomorrow because you're the mayor, right? Like I didn't want any special treatment. But what I is that they would say, oh, we can get you in 6 weeks. We can get you in 8 weeks. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I'm struggling, other people are struggling and they're having all these barriers to entry. So this is, a real thing. And then they would say, do you have insurance? And I'd say, yes. And they'd say, yeah, but we don't take insurance. Now, a lot of people don't have insurance, right? I'm just very fortunate that I have insurance. But think about it. They would say, no, we don't take insurance. We only take cash pay. So then like, this is just a huge problem that we have to address. And that's when I kind of pivoted and said, what can I do that's kind of outside the box that we could get people help right now in the pandemic? And we had CARES Act money on the federal side that came in for the pandemic. And I used money from that to buy every single resident a Talkspace membership for a year because I wanted them to have access to mental health.
Mhm.
And it was very unconventional. And of course, people are going to be negative with anything that you do. But the people that reached out to me that said, it saved their life, that many of them had struggled with addiction. It helped them from, not using. It had helped them with their marriage because their marriages were falling apart. There was one man that reached out that had terminal cancer that said that, it was just the biggest relief. And so those kinds of stories made it, very much well worth it.
Yeah. That's really incredible to hear that people, like, even just hearing, you could hear one person respond in a way that it impacted their life positively.
Yeah.
And I'm sure even that is like, well, that was worth the entire investment, let alone, several stories like that.
And to your point, people criticized me because of the cost. And I said, but what's the cost of one life? To
Right.
me, that's priceless. If
Mhm.
that's someone you love, you can't put a price on that.
Right.
You can put a price on the people that you love. So yeah, so that was really important.
It's interesting when you talk about, like, I'm just strength earlier, or when you were kind of navigating, personal connections to mental health and mental illness and things like that, and just during the pandemic and all of that, and to hear that one of your responses while navigating those feelings was continuing the fight, continuing the advocacy, and actually, being that person who was helping other people, who was giving other people that opportunity to process and navigate things that they were going through, which I think is such an incredible showing of strength that you presented there. But anyway, I just think that's really cool. Really cool to hear.
Thank you. Well, that's very kind. I'm also really critical and judgmental of myself. Like, oh, we got to do more. We got to do more. Like, it's never good enough. But I grew up in a family that was very emotional. And so, I think as children, we want, to make our parents proud, like, and so I think I was always like, look it, we can do this, we can do this. And so much of I laugh today because my mom will call me after a city council meeting, and I tell this story a lot, that she will call me and say, why are you wasting your life? I'm like, Mom, I thought you were proud. I'm trying to help people. And, I try to tell her what I'm doing. Well, she had a massive stroke. So sometimes I have to be a little bit more, more, I guess we do a lot of, I don't know, what's that game? Not Pictionary, but we do a lot of charades.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As a way to communicate.
Right. But I hope I make her proud. But some days I feel like, just like everyone does, we feel like we're failing. We feel like we're imposters. We feel like, just, it's a lot right now. Look at our world. It's in a place that's very uncertain, and people are really internalizing it. And so all of us are walking around, I don't care who you are, with some sort of level of uncertainty and ways in which I think we don't even realize that, some of these things manifest, and, eventually they can be really challenging for people to work through. And so
Right.
we got to start giving people, that's the other piece of this, is that I think we have to be proactive instead of reactive. Government is super reactive. They've got to get proactive. And so that's why I say, we got to be in the schools early and often talking about our mental health, and allowing, young children especially to identify with their feelings and those things. And so I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do, especially to be proactive.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to think about, like, when people, I, at least personally, when I'm feeling discouraged about the major, grand problems in the world and everything, which exist, right, and we're in our present, I find myself, like, looking at community, right, and looking at the things, because I think one of the biggest misconceptions I personally find is people thinking that no one's doing anything about these things. And I think that's such a misconception, because
Yeah.
at the community level, and whether it's local government or community or organizers or leaders, I know for a fact, and I know you know for a fact that that work's being done across the board. Now, at the scale of the entire country or the world and all that, those are different things. But people are doing this work, and so sometimes when I'm feeling discouraged, it's really I kind of look back to communities and I look to those people that are waking up every morning and going, and working until the wee hours of the morning, doing this stuff, sitting in on these meetings, having these conversations. And I think that's being reflected in the work that you do. If you're really looking at the communities, because if you look at the overarching themes, you can get discouraging. But if you look at what's really happening in communities, I feel like it's maybe a different story.
Yeah, I think so. It's easy to get discouraged in this space. Like I was like, how come no one's talking about it? But I mean, there are people there, like you, Sam, there are people that wake up every day and do this work. And I think everyone has a role to play. I have a role to play. Obviously, I feel very responsible to have a role to play to open doors, in this space. And you have a role to play to open doors for people to get treatment, this clinical side of things. So there's a lot of people that have a role to play. And if all of us are doing it together, we're going to be much more successful. But I get discouraged, especially whenever I, you know, and maybe just because it's something that's so personal to me, I just see people sometimes on the street and I just get very discouraged because, there could be a man lying on the ground screaming and yelling, and someone will walk over, "What's wrong with you?" And he's holding his side, and we take him to the hospital, and, it's his appendix. What do? We operate on it, right?
Mhm.
But a week later, same man rolling on the floor, screaming and yelling, and you walk over and you say, "What's wrong?" And he can't articulate because he's highly schizophrenic or has severe mental health issues, bipolar, whatever that looks like. But what do? We just let them lay on the ground. I mean,
Mhm.
totally unacceptable. So when I see those kinds of things, I think that's where I get super discouraged. So I think we have a long way to go in this country. I think we have to start addressing the amount of beds that are in or that, the capacity of beds, because
Mhm.
we're seeing that most communities don't have enough to treat this crisis. I think it's the number one crisis that we're not talking about. It's still very much in dark shadows, when you especially see people living in tents in very prominent places, makes you feel like, why are people not seeing, what's in front of them? Like, I feel
Right.
like if we become desensitized, and so that's where I get discouraged. So I can relate to what you're saying, but I think we got to wake up every day, and I have to break it down, saying if I can help one person, it's
Yeah.
just the way I thought about Talkspace whenever I was criticized for doing it, that if I could just save one person, that's priceless. So I think we have to be careful about, like, oh, we have all this work to do, because we have a lot of work to do. And it's like how to eat an elephant. And it really is one bite at a time,
Right.
because it is so massive. Because as you know, Sam, to start to break this down, because one of the things that we're doing here, and this is so critical, and it's not being done enough, but this is where mayors can be very effective when we talk about this and how we're going to tackle it. Because let me tell you something, we have failed in this country. We have failed in cities about, what we've been doing. We need to recognize what we've been doing does not work. And what I'm trying to get at is that we have to really diagnose each person differently, because people are struggling for different reasons. So you
Right.
can't say that one size fits all, right? Especially like when it comes to homelessness. You have to triage everyone to find out what is going to work for them, right?
Right.
Because everyone has different reasons for why they're experiencing trauma or why they're experiencing homelessness or those kinds of things.
Mhm.
Once we do that and we really know, then we can have such better outcomes. But now, like I was saying, we do the reactive approach where we put everyone in the same box and treat it the same way. And so though that's what's making a difference. And also, Washington can be really disappointing because they're so, I guess, just politically, I don't even want to say out to lunch, but they are half the time because they're, there's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of things that, that don't get done. And, cities we're 24/7 and we're working constantly. Right. And so I think that's another thing that mayors have really realized is that this is probably not going to happen at the federal level and have, complete, or, you know, laws, comprehensive bills that are going to be, coming soon. We
Right.
cannot them to save us. So
Yeah.
mayors are that we have got to do this ourselves. We've got to do it at ground zero and honestly where it is the biggest fight. So that's why we're trying to really navigate the ways in which we can have long-term success when it comes to this crisis.
It makes me think about how when you reached out when you were reaching out and calling some places and they were saying, we can meet you in 6 weeks, we can meet you in 8 weeks. And it's sort of like, okay, making the analogy to like the federal government, maybe they could see an issue in a long term, like in trying to, talk about it, whatever. But ultimately there's people that need help right now, not in a year or 5 years or 10 years. That's also important. And that's to your point of the proactive approaches that should be happening too. But
Right.
all the while, not people can't wait that long. And if people even know that exists, that there's and have access to these things, and then having the courage to reach out and then being told,
Yeah.
6 weeks.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing because I thought to myself, what if I was suicidal right now? Now, luckily
Right.
I wasn't, but I thought there are some people out there that certainly might be. And, that's another initiative that I'm doing here as a mental health, like urgent care, but it's 24/7. And one of the reasons is that I saw it so often with my brother that the only way to get him help was to have him arrested, get him into the system. That
Mhm.
is so wrong and so broken because obviously, as family members, you also worry about the interaction that they might have with the police, right? And those are just incredibly broken systems. So here I'm working on, it's like a mental health urgent care where let's say, anyone was struggling or a family member, because I hear it all the time, family members don't know what to do
Mhm.
with someone that's having, a mental health episode or breakdown. And, I would have loved to have been able to take my brother someplace to,
Right.
deal with his struggle and there was nothing available other than calling the police. And then I would have to cross my fingers and hope that, okay, once we get him arrested, then I'll go to the judge and plead to the judge to help him get into some sort of program. Right.
Right. Right.
And it's wrong. It's broken. It's just insane that that's typically how the system works. But it's really how the system works. So what we're really trying to do here in my city is a 24/7 mental health urgent care. Anyone can go there. Or if you get arrested by the police or the police come across you and you're struggling, or even if you are taken to an ER where
Mhm.
they're not equipped, I always say that's where we fix broken bones, not broken brains,
Mhm.
is, the ERs, and they're not effective. And so we need to have places where people can go and it's very easy access and it's called like a 2-minute warm handoff. And doesn't look like a hospital. It's called, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, Sam, is like a living room model. So
Sure. Right.
that,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? This is very
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm working on here. I've been working on it, unfortunately, for about 6 years. And finally, the last governor gave us a building to do this out of. And then, there are ARPA funds and the county is helping, but it's taken entirely too long. But, I'm not going to give up until we get it done. And we're supposed to break ground at the end of summer. So I'm really excited about that to have an initiative where people can literally go. But again, if we talk about the proactive side. We need mental health urgent cares everywhere that people can just walk in and have accessibility. And especially in our schools, our children should have access immediately. But that's unfortunately not what the structure looks like today. But these are the things that mayors are working through and putting together a comprehensive playbook for cities so that they can, figure out and see best practices that is happening in other cities that are being effective.
Yeah, I will have to talk again when the ground has been broken and everything. That's such an exciting, and I know a 6-year project, and I probably longer than you were hoping, but as we know that these things don't happen easily by any stretch of the imagination. Mayor Schieve, thank you so much again for for your time and for having this conversation with me and for doing all of the work that you do and are continuing to do. I guess I have one last question for you, very briefly. I guess if someone's listening to this and they're thinking they're getting inspired, I know I am, but if there's people listening to this and feeling inspired and they want to get involved or and I know every community is different, but in general, what is the best way to access local government at the mayoral level or at any kind of city council? How can people get involved or get engaged with those conversations?
Yeah, I think that's great. It's a great question. And a lot of people want to be involved. They just don't know how. I would say go to your city council meetings. You can speak in public comment. Usually it's 2 to 3 minutes. And I know that's a scary thing, right? Like top 3 fears are flying in public dentist.
Right. Right.
And trust me, that's how I started. I was scared to death. I remember looking up at this dais, but have the courage, because when you're speaking up, you're doing it on behalf of someone else. So don't think about I think we get, oh my gosh, we start to get nervous. What if I sound this way or that way? But turn it back on helping someone else. Sometimes that also eases the fear and anxiety of when you go and do something that doesn't feel normal. But going to public comment, I think, is really critical, because there are so many times I'll hear stories or people will have great initiatives that they bring to the table that I'm like, yes, I'd love to work with you. Particularly, I love to work with artists. I think art is so healing for the soul and it's great for your mental health. And so I'm a big believer in arts. But I would say that, and also, you could go to any city website wherever you're at and reach out to your mayor. This is really important because this happens all the time to me. People that don't know me will reach out to, every city has a website, and you should be able to find your mayor's email address there. And if you don't, just email the city and just say, I'd love to tell the mayor about this initiative I have, or I'm currently working with children, in healing arts, or I'm, doing this. And not to mention, oftentimes they will have funding, but they're also looking to partner with people that have great ideas, because especially mayors, they're really good collaborators. So they do want to hear from you. And like I said, I've had great partners because people just reached out by email. I know it sounds simple, but it's really easy to do. But I say do that because that's a great place to start. And, and I would imagine there's the National NAMI is always really good. Yeah. I love them because, there's like-minded people there. I would start there as well. And then the other thing is talk about it. That's an easy sort of, not easy, but it's an easy access point to, with your friends and family. How are you doing today? How's your mental health? I know people are back when you ask that, but they don't think about it. We're so programmed when how you doing today? We all say, fine, great.
Right. Yeah. Right? No matter how we're feeling.
Program, right. Yeah. To put on a happy face. And sometimes honesty can be the best policy when you're struggling. So that's just sort of my recommendation. So reach out to your mayors and and become future psychologists and psychiatrists. We need you in this field, right, Sam?
Yes. I love from needing to, or from wanting to move a sign 2 feet to one direction to all the incredible work that you've done. Mayor Schieve, this has been an absolute honor to get the opportunity to speak with you. And I hope that we can chat again in the future.
I would love that, Sam, and good luck and keep up the great work. Because like I said, anytime you're talking about it, it's making a difference. And I can't wait to hear all your other episodes.
Thank you. Thank you again to Mayor Schieve for the conversation and for the work she does for her community and so many others. Thanks as always to John Marikoski for writing and producing our beautiful theme music. And thank you for tuning into Courage Speaks. We want to remind our listeners that the information and discussions presented in this podcast are intended solely for educational purposes. The content provided is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. It's important to consult with qualified mental health professionals or healthcare providers for personalized guidance regarding your individual situation. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, the field of mental health is complex and ever-evolving. The views and opinions expressed by the host, guests, or participants are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Courage to Connect Mental Health Center. For Courage Speaks, I'm your host, Sam Sherman. Be kind. Talk soon.